Okay, welcome to the weekly meeting. So as usual, I have a few topics to talk about. Mainly, this has to do with regards to the white paper as well as some follow-ups discussions in terms of EOS, since that's been the floating idea as of last week. So, and I know Unicron had some other things that he wanted to go over, as well as some ideas that are somewhat part of the project, but not necessarily outlined in the white paper at this point in time. So, one of the first things that I wanted to talk about was third-party storage of the Novusphere state on EOS. So I just recently added that part to the white paper. It wasn't there originally because I wasn't exactly sure if it should be. But since we're leaning more towards this idea of potentially using a third-party blockchain, I figured it might as well be included, as well as it actually solves a problem that we had with the original design of Novusphere, which could not guarantee that block producers were also seeding the metadata associated with Novusphere. Could ensure that they were seeding the transactional data that made up the blockchain, but not the actual metadata itself that would have been embedded in the transaction in the case of if we had our own blockchain. So in terms of first, I guess what we should talk about is how state storage works on EOS and what state storage actually is. So I guess the easiest way to explain this is imagine state storage in terms of an Ethereum smart contract. So essentially, it's any of the information that the smart contract needs to persistently remember. So let's say, for example, inside of the contract, we have a variable that says who the current owner of the contract is, which gives that specific address certain permissions. Then that is part of the state variables that are associated with the contract. So the more state variables you take up, the bigger of a footprint you have on the blockchain. So now, in terms of a naive implementation of how this can work, you can have the contract on the blockchain remember all the hashes of the IPFS hashes, and that essentially is your index. That's all the files or all the metadata that's associated with Novusphere. Now the problem with that is that actually leaves a very big footprint on the blockchain. And if we were building on Ethereum, this would not be so much of a problem because each time you make an alteration to the state, this is factored into the gas cost of the transaction that the user makes. But for the sake of our model, we need free transactions. So the way EOS handles this is if you have a contract that needs to occupy state the on the EOS network, um, there needs to be a certain amount of EOS that's staked for that storage space. So in the EOS white paper, I believe it actually explicitly describes it as if that space is never deleted, you might as well consider that EOS to be the EOS that's being staked for that storage space, the state space, to even exist off market or to no longer be in circulation, because it cannot be removed unless the state that it's a collateral for is deleted. So in case of EOS, it's not very viable to write every single IPFS hash that's indexed into that's indexed in Novusphere to the contract. So there is a way that we can do this very efficiently, and the way we do that is rather than recording every single IPFS hash, we record sort of blocks of data, very actually similar to like how a blockchain works. And you bundle a bunch of metadata together into a block, And once you get past a certain threshold, you create a new block and you reference the old block. And then you update the IPFS hash in the contract. Now, each time you update the IPFS hash in the contract, the gateway maintainers in this case, these guys would all be running Node software on their computer. They would be able to cast an approval vote of is this an actual valid state change in terms of Novusphere? And if 2/3 of them agree that yes, okay, this is a valid state change, then it's accepted as the new change. So what this actually allows for us to do is we reduce the footprint that we take up in terms of storage space on the EOS blockchain from potentially n number of uh, metadata hashes, the IPFS hashes, to just a single hash, as well as a contract to sort of manage the gateway maintainers voting. So this is a good system to get around the state storage in terms of EOS, since we can't just arbitrarily keep consuming more and more state storage on EOS because it's not financially viable. Because if we needed to do that, then we would need more and more EOS to collateralize that storage space. Now, one of the things I wanted to talk about that I wanted to see what Unicron's ideas and what his thoughts are on is it has to do with the account registration. So there was a discussion a little bit earlier in the chat about this, which is if we were to build on a third-party blockchain such as EOS, users of our platform who are not just viewing content, but are instead adding content or trying to actively participate in the system by upvoting or commenting, etc., they would need their own EOS account. Now, in the case of Steam, we know that when you go to register a Steam account, you have a few options. You can either register through the faucet that they provide, which they require your phone number as a means of preventing spam. And once they can verify that, they let you register. But this does somewhat compromise your anonymity on the internet. So not everyone might be willing to do that. Another option is to actually have the Steam yourself that's required to own, that's required to set up an account. So you can pay that or buy that in Bitcoin or something else along those lines. And lastly, I think, and this is not possible in Steam, but I think it would be interesting if there was a possible third option, which user could, if they did not want to pay money or crypto to buy the Steam, or I guess in this case, the EOS to register their account, and they didn't want to submit their personal information, it would be interesting to have a possible way of mining the sufficient amount to do so. So I have an idea of how this could work on EOS. Yeah, well, I have two ideas of how it could work on EOS. And if we were building on our own separate chain, it's not as much of an issue because it could be built natively into the protocol. So well, I'll go over my first idea in terms of how it could work on EOS. The most naive way to approach this would be to have something like a mining pool set up or something like that, where a user could point a traditional miner to it, and that could start mining any arbitrary amount of altcoins that were added to that mining pool, and then that mining pool could take the rewards and convert them to, or sell the altcoins to EOS essentially to pay for the user's registration. Now, my concern with that is that might actually take too long, because I'm not exactly sure how long it would take a user to mine the sufficient amount of EOS needed and required to register an account. I think most people would, the majority of users, I feel, are comfortable with the idea of the process of using the phone number to register. But obviously, we do have a lot of users who want to preserve their anonymity that may not want to pay. So that's one way of going about it, is to have a mining pool that does this automatic conversion for the user, and sort of they can provide their mining power to it, and then that will register their account for them. Another way to do it would be to build a contract into the EOS protocol that allows a user to mine for Atmos or something along those lines. However, this has risks involved in it in terms of how this can be exploited and how it may not be necessarily used to actually mine for the faucet's sake. And what that would allow someone to do is, let's say they would be able to mine Atmos, and then we could automate it so that it sells that small amount of Atmos on the market, and then that provides the faucet for the user. So while I don't think either of those are particularly great ideas to addressing this problem, they are potential solutions. So do you have any comments on this in regards to how the account registration and the faucet system works on Steam and EOS Unicron?
I think you pretty much covered what we discussed. I think there's three ways. One is the faucet, which is provided by like Steemit, which is a company website, who pay for people to get an account. Then there's you can pay yourself just a minimum fee to get the balance in terms of vested Steam. And then the third way, I think, is you can vest for somebody, like use your bandwidth to pay for them to create an account. And I guess the last one is I'm not sure exactly what the numbers are right now for EOS, for example, or even for Steam. But yeah, and you discussed the POW idea of mining for Atmos and then using on-chain dexes like interfaces to sell it for EOS and pay for it that way. It's pretty inconvenient to have a second currency to worry about overall. And whenever you make a DApp on another platform, so it has to be dealt with somehow to make users entry as easy as possible. You pretty much covered it all.
Okay, so there is another thing regarding EOS's system that somewhat concerning to me, but I'm not exactly sure what the long-term impact of this is. So what I was wondering was, I wanted to get your opinion on this. So let me link something. Hang on. So if you take a look at the link provided, at this point in time, only about 33% of the EOS that's been issued as ERC20 tokens have been registered at this point in time. So let's say that amount stays the same all the way up to June 1st, when the mainnet launches, is supposed to happen, and the snapshot gets taken. What do you think is likely to happen to the remaining 66% or 67%?
Oh, I know you can still recover it. It just won't be as safe and for people to do. I didn't quite get the method that they plan to use, but something about it being more exposing a private key than you'd like to recover it later, which is why they're trying to get people to register to make it as safe as possible to transfer. And for record, I haven't registered my EOS account.
I think most of the exchanges are already registered, actually. Given the fact that it's a one-time process. You only need to do it once per Ethereum. You don't need to do it each time you get more EOS. You register a per Ethereum address. So as long as an exchange was holding all their EOS on, let's say, one address or two addresses, they would only need to register those two addresses. Yes, it is. It's per address. So even if once you've registered your address, even if, let's say, you bought more EOS, you don't have to re-register. So I'm just kind of curious to see. I have read that they do have proposals in place for the people that do not register as to how they'll be able to recover. But I'm just wondering. Well, I know this isn't something you would know, but I'm just wondering as a speculative point how long it'll take for those people to actually obtain that EOS. Because let's say this process takes maybe a month before they've handled everyone, this could actually create a big supply shortage at the very beginning if there aren't a lot of people that have registered. On the other hand, if it's something they've dealt with within the first week or something like that, then it's not so much of a problem.
Well, resource-wise, I have to point out that you're only trying to compete with how much is vested and not just overall supply for the resources on the blockchain.
Yes, that's a good point. As I said before, I don't really see it being too demanding in terms of the actual resources that our contracts need. The biggest thing that I had worried about previously was the state storage Novusphere would need to exist on EOS, but as I mentioned earlier in this chat, that a lot of that state storage can actually be segregated from EOS and actually just held on IPFS. And then all you need is to keep on EOS is an IPFS hash and a contract to manage the gateway maintainers voting on the current state of the system. And as I mentioned before, this actually incentivizes gateway maintainers to ensure that all the metadata is seeding. So just for clarification, it's the metadata, not the actual file that the metadata points to is seeding. So they are incentivized to actually keep all that metadata seeding because if another gateway maintainer needs to sync to the chain and too many gateway maintainers, let's say, fall out of sync, there's a possibility that more than 2/3 can't actually agree upon the state of the system. And in that case, the system wouldn't be able to progress any further, which would mean that the gateway maintainers are not being paid. So I think this is a good way of incentivizing them to ensure that this data is always available on IPFS and anyone can download it. So yeah, if you want to talk about some of the ideas that you had that are not mentioned yet in the white paper that we have been considering adding, I think I've already mentioned one, which is the potential for mining as a solution to third-party blockchain problem, but you can take over from here.
Yeah, sure. Well, just to mention, we're always thinking about POW as a way to let people enter into the system without having any coins, and it also improves the distribution over time. I guess the new part of that is just having the benefit of on-chain other apps or dApps, whatever, that could like act as dexes where you could sell off EOS, or sorry, you could sell off Atmos for EOS in small amounts automatically, and then let people fund things, or just keep Atmos however they like, and improve the distribution. So that doesn't really matter, I think, too much if it's on another chain or ours. But we'll have to probably depend on another third-party DEX app instead of writing it ourselves. But so it'll be more further down the line. And other ideas I wanted to discuss that are not part of the white paper yet. So there's a concept of police nodes that I had that so there's a lot of file storage projects, right? Storage, SIA, I think there's Swarm, maybe Made. I'm not sure if that ever comes out. Filecoin. A lot of them don't have a way to deal with. So a lot of them check if people have the files. So they can check if you have a file by testing you with like some kind of challenge, and you have to respond with a hash of the file and maybe the challenge combined, and I can see if you have the actual file in storage. So something to, but a lot of these tests don't cost much bandwidth. So you can respond with a hash and not use much bandwidth at all. And bandwidth is pretty expensive and limited. So a lot of these services do not have a way to ensure that people who have the files actually share them with people who try to download them. And this is something that's pretty common in IPFS. You'll have a hash that's maybe seeded originally, and then maybe you won't be able to access it later at all, or you might not be able to access it at a reasonable speed. So something that one of the parameters, for example, for the DAO or the decentralized organization is to vote on, for example, a minimum bandwidth parameter, right? Some kind of minimum requirement of speed to provide the file where it counts as available. And this is not a solved problem. Actually, if you look in the storage white paper, they literally say they don't have a solution for this, and they might use some kind of reputation system down the line. And they literally use the word some kind. So my proposal was originally to do police nodes. I don't know what to call them: internet police nodes, quality assurance nodes. It'd be an automated node service where you, like, same way as you sign up for being a judge or a gateway keeper or block producer, you could sign up for being a police node, and it's pretty hands-free attempt at basically a secret shopper program. So we can't have everybody downloading the same file at once. It would basically, like I said before, DDoS the user. So instead, you have this random selection, not actually random, but based on hashes and everything to make it hard to predict, where you'd have different nodes selected to test different files on the network that should be online. And of course, they'd be paid out of the bounty. Ideally, you would have 3 nodes, police nodes, that would take a vote. They'll commit the answer to the vote in a hash, and then they would have to submit the actual vote later. So it's a blind study or a blind vote, and ideally 2 out of the 3 should match to get payout. Then and that's basically the gist of the police node program that would where you normally have we have a bounty contract, and the bounty contract pays for file storage technically as part of its full amount. So not just to reward the bounty, but also to have some people make the file available. And the police node would check for if those people with their, for example, an IPFS seed ID, are they actually providing the file? Are they listed if you search for this hash in the IPFS network? Is there's going to be one of the nodes that have the file pinned? And is it going to meet the minimum bandwidth requirement for the file to be available? If those are all matching, then the node would get payout. So of course, it could mean that the node may not be very fast, but another node is providing it. But that's fine as long as it's provided in any way. But if the file is completely removed and not accessible, or if the node is not even trying to seed it at all, then I feel like they shouldn't get a payout, and this should incentivize some people to stick around and actually feed the files at a reasonable rate, and the rate could be decided via vote. And the second part of this is actually so a lot of these programs that you basically pay for your file to be available from day A to day B, right? Some kind of time range. And that could be, and basically people would collect the money for the time range, providing the file, and then they would stop at the last day or even maybe the day before because it's just not worth them for the last day. Maybe there's a better deal somewhere else. So I was going to propose in these in the payout, so you pay out the same amount of the contract, of the bounty contract, but instead of having hard cutoff at the last final date, what you have is an exponential decay, and you pay out lower and lower and lower over time. But if you integrate all the sums over time, it'll still be the same amount as the A to B payout. So it'll be basically an A to exponential decay payout. So you always have some finite payout for a very long time until you hit some minimum amount, maybe like 1 Satoshi or something or less, or around there. I mean, or by Satoshi, I mean the smallest fraction of atoms that we want to actually incentivize with. And you'd have somebody around the world who might actually want to provide it for some finite reward. So maybe the bandwidth requirement would decrease over time as well, in the same proportion as the payout, but you'd have some finite bandwidth available for a longer time than just the final date. And this could keep files online for much, much longer. Maybe forever, I'm not sure. for a very long time, as long as one file is pinned somewhere. So that's the two biggest, I think, contributions we had for Atmos. We haven't really discussed them yet. They're in like our giant brainstorming file of all the ideas. But that was kind of the staple of having the persistent IPFS data. And nobody does either of these, as far as I know, and that'd be very exclusive to Atmos. That's I wanted to get some opinions on that.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I think the automated or possibility of an automated QA node is pretty interesting. But what would be? I guess it's still early, but what would be kind of the incentive and reward? Would it be a lucrative thing to have a QA node that could monitor both the seeding bandwidth performance and maybe even automate the dispute systems and challenge some files that are stored that are broken or below the minimum requirement?
Right, the payout would have to come out of the bounty contract to prevent a Sybil attack from having some kind of universal contract and make fake file submissions. Basically, it'd have to be part of the bounty and split between file providers and people who are checking on the files occasionally. So if you have an automated node running, you would technically have constant income from checking different files. It's basically an objective test. It automatically downloads the file, measures the bandwidth it had, maybe a median bandwidth or something, and then compares it to the required bandwidth and submits a vote. And then you have maybe 2 out of 3 nodes who check the file if the payout or if the file is registered as submitted and properly provided at right bandwidth. All the people get, or the nodes get payout, and the file provider gets a payout. Otherwise, just the nodes get payout.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that would be a very interesting thing that I don't think anybody else would be doing right now with a similar platform.
Yeah, it doesn't exist.
Very cool.
Yeah, so just to clarify, so this mainly has to do with extending Novusphere to support a mechanism that would allow for native file storage. It utilizes, obviously, an existing data storage layer. In this case, we're talking about IPFS, but as Unicron put it, it ensures the quality of it and that the fact that the file actually stays seeding. As many of the other projects, what they do is they do a proof of storage, which proves that you actually have the file, but it's very difficult to do the proof of bandwidth that actually proves that you are seeding the file. Regarding what Road Crypto said in the chat, I know it was said as a joke in terms of using a masternode system for this. I actually don't think that would be too terrible of an idea in the sense, yeah, as the police notes, in this sense. I wouldn't necessarily call it masternodes because it does something entirely different, but what I mean by when I say I don't think it would be a bad idea, I mean I don't think that the police nodes or the quality assurance nodes, whatever you want to call them, actually need to be voted in as the judges are. I think actually the system could work off of you providing a collateral to the system and saying, I want to be I want to run a quality assurance node. And you provide a collateral to do that, just as how staking on a masternode system would work.
Yeah, exactly. And you'd still have the same time penalty. So if nodes are just randomly guessing the answer, they would have a severe time penalty and have to wait for a while before they can try again.
We call them smart QA nodes or smart contract QA nodes.
We haven't exactly decided on a name for it, and again, this is an idea that's still being workshopped, so that's part of the reason why it's not mentioned in the white paper at this time, but we believe it's a good way of actually addressing the whole bandwidth and file seeding problem, because it's going to be very common that we see data get added to the index that's related to IPFS, and then maybe a month down the road, the link to that data, or I shouldn't say the link to that data, but the actual file itself may cease to seed on IPFS, which is very bad. So we need ways of incentivizing file storage. It's I don't want to say a second half of the problem, but it's an important part, I think, that no other project has made a meaningful attempt to really solve. So is there any other things that you wanted to talk about with the community, Unicron?
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to double check that these ideas make sense from bouncing off other people. I especially was wondering why nobody tried the DK payout. I think it just makes rational sense not to have a sport. A lot of platforms are not about providing files for a long time to many people. They're about your own files being stored. So but I think it makes perfect sense not to have a finite time limit, but to have a decaying time limit that integrates to the same amount of money in the end being provided for file suppliers.
Well, I think you could actually come up with two reasons as to why, which is, I'm assuming when you say decaying, you mean it's much better to seed the file at the start than it is to, let's say, seed it like 2 years down the road because you're receiving less. However, one reason as to why this might be a bad idea to have a decaying system is, if you think about it, it bloats the state of what needs to be kept track of, because you're going to have a bunch of files that taper off, let's say, much longer than a finite A to B. So that's one reason I can think of that in a decaying system is not as good as an A to B, is because of potentially the bloat it causes to state. But just to clarify, when you say decaying, you do mean like it goes down from the initial day the bounty is posted. Am I correct?
Yeah, at some point you originally might get paid $1 per day. I'm just guessing, and then in a month you might get paid 50 cents per day, and then less and less over time, right? But I guess if you have a cutoff at the minimum somewhere, still just much further down the line, you could prevent it from being forever. But yeah, you might still have a pretty significant load. But you could also try keeping it off chain, as in with a committed hash.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we can look into. So I think what we should do for that is, I am this week going to look to make some updates to the website, including the new white paper, as well as updating some links. I think what we should look at doing is, I plan on refactoring and removing some of the existing proposals that are up there, since we have the white paper now. So I think what we should look at doing is perhaps doing a write-up regarding the police nodes, since it's not a fully fleshed out idea at this point in time, and putting it up there under those sort of ideas that are already up there. And then we can come back to that, at a later point and continue to revise it. Because, as you said, I think it's important because it does tackle a problem that's relevant to the project that not a lot of the other file storage projects have addressed in a meaningful way.
That's pretty much it for my talk today.
I'll just bring up that I don't think that idea has ever been implemented and worked completely. If you even go back to other file sharing platforms in the past, you could definitely hit, some files specifically that never got seeded quickly, or the bandwidth was so low. I remember files taking forever to download in some of the old platforms. So,
well, the way that the torrent systems have done it is they usually will have private trackers, but that is bad in terms of privacy.
yeah.
So what they'll do is they'll have a private tracker system, and they will give you like a point system. It's like a point system, right? So the more you upload on their platform, the more you seed, the more you're able to download. But that doesn't really work too well in terms of what we need it for, especially with the whole privacy being compromised. But yeah, I guess that's about it for what I had to talk about today as well. It was mainly to do with the efficient state storage on EOS and how we would handle and tackle that problem. Because I thought some people might be concerned about how would we actually keep an ever-growing database on EOS without an infinite amount of money. And the other thing is the account registration problems that we might run into in the future. So if anyone has anything else that they'd like to talk about or any questions, now would be a great time.
I wanted to mention that it's very likely that EOS will have many faucets to create accounts, like many. Same way as Tmid and busy.org and all kinds of other ones provide some service to create notes or create accounts for people. People could technically use one of those to create their account for Atmos if we do go on their chain.
Yep, that's correct. Regarding Steam, are there multiple faucets for it? Because I took a look at it earlier today, and it was just a glance. The only ones that I could find was the main Steam faucet and a few alternative options where you could pay for it in Bitcoin or like Ethereum to have your account registered.
I think I've seen like Steam Global or something, but it's been a while. I haven't really checked Steam too much, but I know BitShares has almost every individual like website, wallet host has their own faucet.
Well, BitShares has the incentivized system of registering accounts for other people, right? Because in BitShares, the way the system works is you get a small amount of the fees that anyone you register an account for pays. So BitShares has a high incentive to pay the registration fee for other users.
Good
But
point.
I don't think that's the case in terms of in Steam. It's more so done out of goodwill to grow the platform. But I do think that even in the case of EOS, where EOS is more similar to Steam in this aspect, since there are no fees, I do think that given the fact that we're seeing a lot of regional EOS nodes, that we are going to see faucets that are specific to certain regions. So I think you are right in the sense that we will see multiple EOS faucets and it won't just be one like how Steam has it. So that's something to also consider. I think what we should do in that regard, if we do build on EOS, is to wait and see sort of how the faucet system plays out, and if need be, we can introduce that third option where a user is able to register an account with Atmos, which would essentially be an atomic swap, or they're able to do it through POW, through some mining. So I think those are ideas to explore later down the road, and maybe I'll look to do like a write-up for a proposal and add that to the site so it's on there instead of adding it onto the white paper.
I just pasted a small snippet from a chat in BitShares chat where somebody, people are talking a lot about moving to EOS, and I'm repeating what I said before. It was nice to see somebody else write out the same thing. Is that it's very much in flux right now, so it's hard to commit to something we don't know exactly how it will be in the final version.
Right. Yeah, I agree entirely. Okay, well, if anyone has anything else to add, be a good time. Otherwise, I think that's about it for this week's meeting.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks guys. I'll see you guys next week.
Thanks, everyone.